First of all, let me just welcome everybody to our talk with Hugo McCloud about his recent show at Sean Kelly Gallery. I want to thank Sean Kelly Gallery for organizing this. It's been really great, even though I can't visit the show in person, which has kind of driven me nuts. I feel like I've lived it in a sense because I've been able to see it, online. So. And Hugo, thank you for joining us. I know you're in Mexico at the moment.
I'm in Mexico, yeah.
Outside of Tulum, right?
Yeah, just outside of Tulum. So grateful, fortunate for sure.
Healthy,
regrouping.
Good.
Post-show, getting ready to start back up again.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and, oops, maybe Adair, maybe you could allow me to share my screen here. It looks like it's not letting me do that. And we'll get started in just a second to talk about some preceding works, that led up to the works that are in the show, and also, and most importantly, the works that are included in the current show, Burdened, which is up until February 27th. So, I mean, Hugo, you really, I think, made a name for yourself a number of years ago with the abstract works, these process-based works. And I wanted to start here because, even though I think these works look visually very different from the works in the show right now, it's not that they're unconnected in any way. And I'm wondering if maybe you could just talk a little bit about these works, these stamp works, where they came from, and the genesis of them.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Well, the stamp works came from a space within my art practice that I needed to keep searching. I was originally working on the metalworks that I first started my art with, and wasn't really working in my practice at that time when I first moved to New York, trying to situate myself within the art conversation. And I stumbled upon this material just because it was a material that was being used in New York City. And my landlord had just recently redone our roofs. So I saw a freshly painted silver, which is the aluminum protective coat paint that they use on top of the bitumen membrane, which is basically the tar paper. And I just really kind of found it interesting with the impressions that it made through pressure applied on the material, as well as how heat dictated the malleability of the material. And how it all started is I took, there was an extra roll of the paper up on the roof, and I guess in theory, I stole it from the landlord and brought it down into my studio, and I started just experimenting with it and started playing with using different types of metal fencing, wire meshes to kind of emboss in the material and to play with that. And I honestly don't remember exactly what led me to the process of Indian block printing, but somehow I ended up on that process and went down this kind of rabbit hole of researching how the Indian block printing process of textile making went about. And so I experimented with that idea with just some kind of patterns I actually found like one wood block somewhere. I don't know if it was in New York at a thrift shop or something like that. And I tried the process of the repetition. And there was something about the repetition process and the hand process and imperfection of that I just found really interesting and relative to a lot of the meanings of my other works in the sense of like labor and process driven and imperfection and kind of in a sense making do with what you have as well. So, you know, long story short, I ended up traveling to India and researched the block printing making to a greater length, came back. And what's interesting about the India trip is that's actually what pushed me onto the plastic material, the beginning of the plastic. And I think that was like 2013. So it's interesting as well, just kind of how everything ties together, not trying to tie everything together, but it just, you know, everything starts to overlap the more I look back at my career, or short career. So anyways, I came back and had a few blocks, learned the process. Forgive me, I'm sweating because I was just running back and forth, so forgive me for that. But so I came back, I tried the process with the wood blocks that I brought back from India. I liked it again. And then it came time to really kind of figuring out how to find my own source of patterns. And I originally started with buying ornamentation books from like Barnes and Noble, from Strand, beautiful patterns from all over the world, you know. And at that point in my career, I really kind of had this personal pin against my back in the sense that like I needed to really have self-convicting meaning behind my work, not just the ability to make something that was attractive. Because especially with these works, I knew that the aesthetic of them was very attractive, you know? And I knew as well that coming from the design world, I always was very careful of not trying to intertwine those practices in that time, because I really wanted to have real meaning behind my work. And so like I needed to find a source for my own imagery, you know, and living in these very urban environments because of studios, needing studios, and being like, I was in Bushwick 10 years before that, I was in Oakland, and kind of being in these environments that were very kind of either abandoned, left alone, halfway ghettos, impoverished neighborhoods, really, when you think about it. You're around so many things that I look at it in a way that you become numb to. Things that are not attractive at all. You just become numb to it. You know, abandoned cars, abandoned garbage, furniture. And so I started to notice the patterns on the discarded furniture and just found it to be really interesting that furniture could be left in these neighborhoods for such a long period of time without being picked up, either by the city or by the neighborhood, you know, just left on the street. So, you know, as an artist, you're walking from your house to your studio every day, and you're just passing these things up every day, and you just become to a point where it just becomes, you know, part of the norm. Like these things that normally junk, garbage, that normally wouldn't be looked at in that way. And I think that's like there's a deeper meaning to that kind of thought process within my work. And it's like the idea that accepting the environment that you're in and making do with what you have. And also somehow trying to find acceptance in that and beauty in that and some type of attractive in that. Or what about this situation is interesting? So anyways, with the stamp paintings, just in the story, like the stamp paintings, really the story behind it was a collage between what is looked at with distaste and what is looked at of value. So the blocks, the patterns that I would carve on the wood blocks were patterns of the textiles from the discarded furniture. And the paintings that I would paint underneath, where you can see this color, because the whole paint, like this painting here, the whole surface was actually painted. What you see is what's left from the the parts of the wood block that don't get the application of the silver paint. So all the negative parts. So very little of the actual underpainting is left and pops through. And so it's kind of like this idea of overlapping what is looked at with no value over something that is valuable. And the paintings that I would paint down, because it was also in a sense how I was self-educating myself in a sense. And I didn't really, at that point in time, I did not understand. I understood what I liked about color, but I didn't understand color theory and how to apply different colors together and the stories that makes. And so what I would do is I would look at a lot, at that point in time, a lot of fashion design magazines and like high couture magazines. And I just found it really beautiful in a sense, the textiles that were made from these couture designers, the textiles that were made and used for these dresses. And I knew that, it didn't matter the names that were attached to these designers or to these dresses. When you opened up a magazine and you saw Givenchy or, any of these brands, Gucci, Burberry, any of these brands, you already automatically associate it with wealth and with value. Didn't matter if you liked the dress or not, you associated that branding with the idea of value. The same way that you would associate this old couch on the side of the street that's left there as not valuable. So it was this idea for me of taking something that, the people that found the dress or the article of clothing valuable, they would want that in their house, or they would want that to own that. They necessarily didn't want that discarded piece of furniture in their clean house, or in their environment. But it was the idea of taking something that was overlooked and kind of purposing it, imagining it. Like, what if this was like this? Then would you find this valuable? Yeah. And so that's kind of like the story of the stamp paintings, the actual story that I had to continually go under. Because the other reason why I had to do that is because I made several of the stamp paintings. And after I understood the process, I'm the type of artist that, immediately, I don't want to say immediately, but I get bored. I have to have something that is thought-provoking or challenging within the process to keep furthering the idea. So the idea of going out and hunting for these images and seeing why in these environments the stuff is left, having a backstory for myself so that when I'm in a studio, it's almost in a sense while I'm doing this monotonous process of putting the paint on the thing, heating up the material, stamping it over and over. So like this one here, it's probably 320 stamps, and you're doing that for 4 or 5, 6 hours. And that's the final process of the painting. So you're doing that for 4 or 5, 6 hours straight. You have to have something playing in your head of the reason why to do this,
Yeah.
And so that's the story behind these stamp paintings.
And I mean, I would say we should remind folks and let folks who don't know that, you're essentially self-taught, right? I mean, we live in this world where MFAs are these prized sort of, qualifications, but you didn't go to art school. You came from a much different path, from a sort of design and industrial design path. Is that right?
Yeah, I was self-taught in that as well. I actually went to school for football to get away from California at the time. I went to school in Alabama. I went to Tuskegee University. And at that point in time, my whole mission was to be an entrepreneur, actually. I didn't know what type, I just knew I wanted to work for myself. I wasn't really the tech or corporate type of person ever. I was much more of a hands-on. So I actually dropped out of school and was pursuing industrial design and fabrication. And I say industrial design because it kind of gives a broader thing, but really what I was doing is I was a wood and metal fabricator and designer, and I worked alongside architects, developers, and designers for residential and commercial projects. but I was self-taught in that as well, but self-taught in a way that I really understood what I was doing. You know, in the beginning, it was definitely like in your garage trying to figure out how to solder or cut wood properly. But after that, it was, you know, taking different classes for patination, you know, taking welding classes, you know. So it was like, it wasn't one school for everything. It was like I was going here, going there, spending time in the bookstore at night, you know, really kind of self-taught, like really self-teaching myself the trade that I really wanted to be part of. And at that point in time, my aspirations was to really have a very serious design company that was doing, you know, custom wood and metal fabrication and design. Because I saw my career really going in that way, because what was happening is I would be called in for one specific item for this project. And because they liked my eye, it would end up being multiple, you know, different elements for the project. But I was deterred from that after spending, you know, 8 or 9 years in that, because I saw myself becoming more of a manager of the projects. And the only real exciting moments in those projects was the design phase, the creating phase, the sitting down and thinking about and imagining what am I going to create and present to this client. After that, you know, you're doing a project for a construction project, you're at the very end. Design, you know, you're designing and installing at the very end, even though you started at the beginning. But it became so much more of management. And as an artist, like, I really wanted to keep my hands on. And that is the reason why I really went into the fine art practice and trying to figure out what my language was in that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, just moving ahead a little bit here, marching toward the most recent works, you did a series of these that have been likened to abstract expressionism and Barnett Newman, I think. But I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about this group of works and because these preceded or even maybe overlapped a little bit, if I'm not mistaken, with some of the plastic bag works. Is that right?
Yeah, so the metal paintings actually in 2018 is when probably 2017 is when I came back to the metal works. But the metal paintings were the foundation of my actual career, art career. That is what I started doing, was the patina and metal paintings. And it started because that was the material that I had in my fabrication studio left over as scrap. So the scrap metal that I had from old jobs or from projects that I had messed up on, mostly copper sheet, that's what I actually initially used to start making my metal paintings. And when I moved to New York in 2009, that was primarily my focus in the sense of material, because it was the one I knew the most. But it was also not grabbing the attention. And that's kind of how I veered into other materials that then first led to the stamp paintings. So, you know, after doing the stamp painting cycle in like 2017 is when I came back to the metal paintings. And you know, the old metal paintings were much more of a collage of scrap pieces of metal that then made a full-size canvas.
And those were like 06, 07, 08?
Yeah, like I started in 2003, and like then 06 is 07, 08 was when I was actually starting to make something that kind of looked like art. But when I came back to it, it was just under, and I think like that is as well kind of how my career hopefully will continue to go, is that when I step away from a material, it's not that I'm leaving it, I'm stepping away to think about it outside of the studio practice of it, so that I can see really, you know, like really is what is the next step next movement, next step with this material that I want to take. Sometimes, you know, when you're so involved and hands-on, you just find yourself doing the same thing over and over and over again. And it's hard to like really evolve in that material. So in 2017 is when I came back to the metal paintings. And I really kind of had this thought of like a much more refined piece, you know, in a sense, like how, like I don't need to compile all these scrap pieces of metal. I did that because that's what I had, and that's what I had access to. Now I don't have any of that, so I'm not going to cut up a bunch of full-size sheets and to make this. That's not my purpose. So when I reapproached it, it was much more so about the material as is, how the material comes from the manufacturer, meaning like the sizes of the materials. And then knowing that I wanted to join the materials to make larger pieces, it really became about the seams that join the material. And when you're soldering, this is on bronze, and when you're soldering the material, no matter what you do, even as clean as you'll make it, you'll still see a little bit of that silver joint. And so instead of trying to, and as well, because of the nature of the material, when you're soldering and you're applying heat, because metal is it's a porous material. So when you apply heat, it expands. When it's cold, it contracts, you know? So when you're welding, the idea of welding is to really limit the amount of warpage that you have. So I knew all those things would happen to the material. And instead of trying to avoid those natural occurrences of the material, I said, you know what, let me use the solder as an actual movement in the piece. So instead of adding just a little bit of solder, I added tons of solder and used the solder and melted the solder in a sense like a very quick fixing paint. Like, you know, as long as it's hot, I can move it around. As soon as I take the heat off of it, it's going to fix and it's going to stay as is. And that's the amount of time. So in a sense, it becomes partly action oriented. You know, this moment within the painting, it becomes like almost like action painting. So it was really much about the seam of these pieces, the texture in contrast to the flatness of the sides, because a lot of them have a lot of the solder. And then these black ones, it really became about hiding the actual material. And I was using 3 different processes to blacken it. I was doing a blackened iron oxide patina, which, you know, the patina foundation to me was a very interesting thing because it wasn't about applying paint on a material, because then my thought is, well, why use that material at all? The idea with patina is that you're actually using chemicals to alter the material. And that's kind of what I found interesting with patination, is the chemical change of the actual material. So these were predominantly iron oxide and then partly oil stick pieces. So, you know, I didn't know about Barnett Newman, and I can attest to that. Like, I didn't know about Barnett Newman until I actually had a studio visit and somebody told me about the zip paintings. And I'm thankful for that as well, on 2 sides, because I think I probably wouldn't have done this series of paintings if I had known. But then I'm thankful that afterwards, it allowed me to understand a moment in history of the art world, you know, and how I am instinctively having a conversation with that, you know, within the way that I see things as an artist as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the things that strikes me about the current work that's on view is how reliant on drawing it is. And this work also feels very reliant on drawing. It feels like a type of drawing, you know, a type of product. So I see a very strong connection between, you know, these works and the current works that are on view. But
well, just real quickly, there is an actual connection. I didn't really think about it too much, but the connection that it really makes is that these have to start from a space of understanding dimensions and how dimensions come together. In the same way that the current work, the plastic works, you're doing the drawings and you have to cut the material to those exact dimensions for the piece to come together. So there is an actual relation in that.
Yeah, it's like a registration, right? It has to sort of line up to a certain degree.
Exactly.
Yeah. So another thing before we get to the recent body of work, I just want to, because the recent body of work is so chromatic and it's so wonderfully, colorful. And for those people who aren't familiar, you have worked with color in the past. It's not that you haven't. And I just wanted to bring this painting into the mix to remind people that you are so good with color. And this is a work that's at the Detroit Institute, acquired by my good friend and colleague, Lori Farrell, when she was a curator there. So anyway, I don't know if you want to say anything about this before we move on, but.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think work as an artist, for me, my work changes. And I think it's kind of, you can see that in this current body of work. My work definitely changes as well within the environments that I'm working in. And I've worked in several different environments. I've worked in overseas in the Philippines. I've worked in industrial neighborhoods like Oakland, predominantly Oakland and Brooklyn. And I think now I'm getting into much more color and even landscape and kind of obviously the figuration and stuff like that. But in my past, you think about the environments that these neighborhoods are. They're very bland, very dark. If you do see color, it's usually kind of like distressed. And I think really like that was kind of the focus of a lot of the older paintings. It wasn't, like these paintings here, my intention wasn't to have bold moments of different colors. It was more so about understanding like how many different tones of one hue of color can I create, and then having just small underlining moments of additional colors that complemented those pieces. And I think when I look at the older paintings, it really is a conversation of those single use colors. And just to say this, my first early color theory, I guess, in the sense of what I referenced, was because I came from the industrial, like construction style world, construction architecture. Actually, my first focus of colors was OSHA colors. So if you know what OSHA is, like there's the OSHA safety colors. And a lot of my paintings kind of are within those tones, the orange, yellow, reds, certain types of blues. And then from there, I want to offset those colors. But that was like, I understood those OSHA orange, those OSHA yellows, and it kind of related in a sense like this makes sense in my practice because of my history.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So OSHA, occupational safety and hazard, like those orange safety cones and the yellow safety vests and things like that.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, how you think of these references to color, because I know you've talked about how being in Mexico now has affected your color sense.
Mm-hmm.
And for anybody who's been to Mexico, the colors are just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, even getting into the plastic work was amazing, because when I first got into this work, it was all about sourcing the plastic from the wastelands, from recycling, from the streets, from everywhere. And that's what I first was doing, because it was new to the practice and I was doing just these small pieces. And then once my imagination grew, I want to create this, I want to create that, I started to see that I had to use both old and new. So as I started to source plastic bags while I was in like Brooklyn, from like either Uline or Amazon, different places, most of the bags came from China, and the colors were just like blue, red, yellow, like just these very bland primary colors, but just very badly mixed, like someone just doesn't care, like, oh, that's blue, oh, that's red, like that's it. And in Mexico, what really drew me to it, and which would then led me to actually go and visit the manufacturer plastic company and to really understand both sides of this story, is all of their plastic bags are these beautiful offset, amazing colors. Can I show you guys real quick?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's just like, it's the camera's turn.
Yep.
Okay, so like, and I'll tell you why they are, but you can see just like these colors that are, or this is even better. I can show you like this wall. It's just really beautiful, different shades of kind of the same color. And it was interesting because it's the same way that I mix colors.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's like this one here is just a little bit different. And what was interesting about it is that when I went to visit the plastic company, the reason why is because all of those bags, they're one-off batches because it's all recycled material. So if they're using, if a little bit of yellow gets mixed in with it from a yellow bags that are recycled, the tone's gonna be just a little bit different. But at the same time, I looked at it in a way like there's still some type of artisan that's mixing these colors together, and I think it really, because of the environment that you're in, there's so much greenery here. You see, like when you really start to study trees and look at leaves, one tree can have 100 different tones of green. So yeah, my idea of color has completely changed since I've been here.
So this painting here is in the collection of the Nasher Museum. We were fortunate enough to acquire it last year. And it's from, I believe, the first series of the work that you did with the plastic bags. Is that right?
Yeah, this is, I did a few initial pieces, trying it out, probably like a handful, 3 or 4. This is when I went full-fledged in it and presented this. I think it was at Basel with all the galleries, and said, this is what we're gonna do. And this honestly is actually my favorite piece as well. One of my favorite pieces. I think there's something really, I don't want to say nailed it, but like I feel like I nailed it with the colors. But there's something very strong about this picture, in a sense, starting this narrative of figuration and starting this narrative of the idea of the burdened man, because this is really kind of the very beginning of this idea of the struggle of humans, and the things that you're willing to do. And I think this piece is really supportive of my conversation that I'm having of the beauty of like people and humans. Because if you look at this image, there's obviously the bike fell from being off balance, and you can look at that in several different ways. But you have one person exerting energy, pushing, and you have one person and another person pulling. And that idea of push and pull, that you really need both parts to get the job done. Otherwise the weight of the situation is too much for one person to handle. And I just think like this is like the essence of like the conversation that I'm trying to have.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love the composition of this one. It's fantastic the way that the bike is tilted like that, and they're pulling. One guy's pulling and one guy's pushing, and it's like, these forces that are pushing against one another.
Right.
But this image is from the gallery's website, and I thought it was really illustrative of process. And I'm just wondering, you showed us that an enormous palette of colors. It's amazing. I mean, there's got to be a couple hundred different colors there.
Well, that was my attempt to take all the different plastic bags, and I thought I did the correct math. I'm not a mathematician, to figure out all the different variations of color combinations. Because before I did this, the experimentation was actually done on a piece. And the problem with that is that if you don't like the color combination, there's no reversal. And that's the hardship of this material, is that it's a continual learning process of how one color applied on the next, the third color that it makes, if that's a good color or not, you know? And you can put two pieces of plastic together and kind of see a little bit of the color that it's going to create, but it's different when the two pieces of plastic become one. And that's what's happening with this process, is that it's not a process of applying and taking away. And I think that has always been part of my earlier works. It was the idea of applying and taking away, applying and taking away, and how much do you apply and how much do you take away, that then creates the piece. These works are only applying. There is no taking away and there is no covering up. So it requires just a huge amount of thought and like continual thinking about composition, color play, you know, reading a painting, how color is in one corner, how your eye looks at it. And this is after I had traced, illustrated I projected and then drew the rest of it onto the panel. And the white is actually plastic as well. So as I drew that onto the panel, and then from here, I'm trying to really see what the color story I'm trying to create with the piece. So in a sense, this is just kind of like how I'm laying out the color story of the piece. Because, you know, once I start it, I have to be committed to it or discard it.
Right. It's, you know? I mean, it's sort of like drawing in silver point, you know, using a silver stylus. Like once you make the mark, that's it. You can't erase it, can't change it. It's there. So,
right.
I don't know if you want to say anything about this piece. I included it. We can, you know, it reminded me so much of that sort of, that idea of tension that's in push-pull. And it also, I mean, so many of the works in the show are about people carrying, pushing, really illustrating that notion of burden. And it made me sort of think a little bit of that Greek myth of Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill, only to have it sort of roll down as it reaches the top.
Yeah, you know, it's these images, I think it's, all these images to me are interesting, not for the work, but for, again, the willingness of these people. Because you look at this image and you say, okay, these guys are pushing this, this cart overloaded with stuff up, you know, you can see that it's kind of going uphill in a sense. And I've seen these type of images firsthand so many times. But to me, it's not really about actually even just this moment. It's the fact that most likely these people are doing this every day, several times a day, all day for years on end, you know. That is the beauty that I find in it, you know, that willingness to continue to push despite anything, even in a very uncomfortable manner. And, you know, I guess for me, I'm in a sense trying to beautify that conversation, because, you know, you can look at it in so many different ways of, it is beautiful, the idea that these people will do this to provide for themselves and most likely their family, you know, these things. As well as, you know, I think it's, I guess, you know, and I'm wrestling with this right now because I'm getting ready to start working again. I don't mean to segue, but I'm getting ready to start work again. And the real mission behind this work was to really be able to exercise my love for traveling, but be able to exercise my love for traveling and going to these environments to collect the stories. But I know that myself, that it's not about just taking from these places, that my heart really goes out towards finding what it is that I'm, you know, I look at this, that it's a godsend. This material is a godsend that I came across this, but I can't exactly tell you the reason why I did. I truly believe that like this work is going to lead to something much bigger and greater. And whether that's helping one specific individual that nobody knows, or starting a whole big thing, or being part of something much bigger, I really feel that it is. And I think like that's the idea and mind frame behind the work, and the versatility and the accessibility of the material, as well as knowing that it's a global material and it's a global problem. So, you know, these images, I think they spark a conversation to me of a reality that a lot of us don't live in, but you know, is at our fingertips if you really think about it. You know, like you turn on the news, it's there. You know, these struggles and these situations. So I don't mean to segue into that, but like, or go into that, but like, you know, like that's what I think I'm really searching for in a sense with these images, and why I want to get back out there to collect these images and collect these stories. But it's that struggle, I think, you know, and to break it down even into the idea of a studio practice, I do also think like it's not the struggle of survival in a sense, but even as an artist in the sense of a studio practice, is that you're as well going after something that 99.9% of the people that go after won't achieve and make it, you know, but you believe enough to continually do it day to day. And I think like that is as well some of the hope of these images. These people are willing to continue to do something day to day in hopes that it's going to provide whatever it is that they're going after. So that's, you know, I guess where my thought process is with these works.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, I guess in a sense, like the material itself can be understood as a kind of metaphor for that, a metaphor for this burden, you know, as the show is called. And this one, and I think the next one in the show really interested me. And this was inspired by, these two were inspired by a trip to Morocco. Is that right?
Yeah, I've traveled. Usually when I travel somewhere, I do a lot of, you know, research, whether it's just internet, YouTube, looking at things that I want to be interested in. And, you know, I've traveled to Morocco several times, which led me to these situations that are happening on the coast in Ceuta and Melilla of Morocco. And it's like a border town. It's an area of Morocco that's like colonized, I guess if you want to say colonized by Spain. It's Spaniard territory. But they have like this, it's changing right now. So I think it's in flux, but they have a free trade agreement that whatever you can carry, you know, there's a free trade, whatever you can carry on your back or push across the border, there's no taxes. So it's also one of the main areas that the migrants that come from Libya and from Africa try to cross through. So it's a really chaotic, bad, horrific kind of place in some regards, even though in some other regards, it's actually very beautiful as well on the coast. But these women are paid, they're called the mule women of Morocco. And they're women, men, kids that are paid a very, very low sum to basically carry these heavy, really heavy, cumbersome sacks on their back, or pushing on like these little homemade kind of skateboards across the border to the trades guys on there to basically take these goods into Africa. And, you know, again, like, you know, when you see these images, it just kind of hit me personally, because it's like, what if that was my mom? You know, what if that was my grandmother doing this type of thing? And the idea that, and this is just me telling you truthfully, like how I think about it. It's like, you know, how do we as humans allow these type of things to occur? But within these heavy situations that I'm kind of addressing in this show, and the show is like I'm addressing these things from a very literal way. But the stamp paintings and the other paintings and the other pieces and works that I've done all had the same underlining conversation. I was just disguising that through abstraction and beauty. And because I wasn't really, it wasn't really accessible for me to continually have an in-length conversation about the meaning behind these works, it was just kind of, you know, lost in the wayside of what the meanings of these works. But it was always the same thing. And these straps that they would put around these sacks, in a sense, these pieces are, the abstract piece that I show you is a representation of then how I personally view the things that I see. The same way that I see the discarded furniture, and I use that as a stamp to make these stamp paintings. The same way that I see the white strings that are wrapped around these heavy sacks on these people's backs. Like, I see the woman bent over or the people suffering. I see the hurt and those type of things. And then I also see the beauty in it. Like, I abstract from those things, like these white cords that are wrapped around holding these sacks. And then the colors, like this one is not the best, but there's another woman in the show. I don't know if you have an image of it, but it's basically, you know, of the straps that are wrapped around the sack, and in the sack is multiple different colors. So in a way, I would see that, and I would kind of like, my eyes would zoom in on that and kind of like push everything else away. And that's kind of how I envision abstraction works, and how my abstract works came about in the past. And so that piece that you just showed of the abstract piece, in a sense, that's what this is. And underneath this piece is a topography map of the actual border. So the border between the part that is Spain and the part that's actually Morocco, and the lines. And then so it had this, there's a, you know, in a sense, this is a full geographical map underneath all this. And then from there, I added multiple different colors and layers and all those pieces. And then the final thing that I did on this piece was then adding these white strips in reference to the white strips, the white cords that are wrapped around these sacks of these women's load that they're carrying across the border. So in a way, it's like, if I was to make another dozen of these pieces and they were different colors, the conversation and the reference to the pieces is still the same. You know, I'm in a sense, I guess you can say that I'm in a sense taking away the heaviness and trying to find some type of light in a situation that then can hopefully open up a conversation in a softer manner about the heaviness of the situation. You know, instead of just, hey, look at this crazy situation, this problem, let's talk about it. But if I can introduce the conversation through a manner that is accessible to everybody's palate in a way, and a little bit more attractive to digest, now you're a little bit more open to understand the actual situation and think about it. Because if I pulled you in some way with interest or beauty or attractiveness, you can't now discard that from your mind. If you find this thing to be beautiful, it's not going to change because I told you, well, it's a reference of this. Right. You know, so that's kind of in a way, same as the stamp painting, same as these other things, in the sense what I'm trying to do, like, here's this, I'm making it attractive and making it interesting to look at, but this is what I'm talking about. And now you're forced to kind of like sit with it for a minute.
Yeah. No, the human condition is so central to your work. And, you know, it's most explicit in these representational works, of course, but That was why I felt like, we really had to connect with those early abstractions because it has been a through line since the beginning. And this group, this series here is particularly, I guess, and it's an intense series and particularly emotional in terms of the subject matter, and has also maybe a couple or a historical reference too. But I wonder if maybe you could say a few things about this group.
Yeah, well, the way that it all came about was I was doing, just to give a quick back reference, I was doing the plastic when I first figured out how to do the plastic works correctly. I was actually renting a small little bodega shop in town of Tulum while my studios here in Tulum were being built. And in that time is when I kind of first started doing the stacked plastic works, which was basically the 4 or 5 elongated, kind of irregular stacks. And what those were was an abstraction of the wastelands of the polyethylene bags that were basically filled with stuff stacked on top of each other. So in a sense, like that's what they were, they're an abstraction. And across from me was, they called it an invasion, is basically a squatter camp where people came and lived on this piece of land. And they slowly started to set up like little produce stands and stuff like that. And I remember a banana truck continually coming in filled with bananas, dropping it off in there. And that's how I first made the first banana guy carrying the banana pieces, where like these bananas were on this person's back and all you saw was his shoes. He was just taking them from the truck and then dropping them off. And that, when I first made that first figurative work, was like, that's how the burden man started, like this heavy thing on this person's back. And I liked that idea. And that's what then had me go down a rabbit hole on researching of people that carry heavy things on their back all around the world, whether it's porters or, recyclers or anything, and how all this imagery and all of those things start, you start with guys carrying bananas on their back and you end up with Libyan migrants. And that's how like my research was going. Like it would start with one subject matter and it would end up, and you would see how they all started to intertwine. And so it made me start to really kind of research all these different things simultaneously. And the migrants was always coming back, because as well, then I would see these articles on BBC and different news outlets because it was, the situations in Libya, like this was always part of the current news that was happening. And then I got awarded with Sean Kelly to do Unlimited. And we proposed doing this huge migrant piece that was in a reference to like the Wrath of the Medusa painting, and so, yeah, that one there. And so I was originally doing that, and then COVID happened. So when I did this show, it was like, I really still feel strong about this idea, and I still think it's a very interesting conversation and it ties into this current body of the Burning Man piece, and so when I was thinking about this series for this show, I only did 3 of them. So there's a couple of things happening in these works. The first one was this green one. And I was looking at this, and while I was doing research on the migrants, I also then was thinking about art and art history. And that then had me go into like research of like Peter Doig's paintings, of the canoe paintings. And then from there, I saw the one canoe painting that he did of the woman slumped over in the lake. And I think I don't know exactly the name of it because I can't ever find the exact name, but the reference of the painting, his reference of the painting came from Friday the 13th, Freddy Krueger Friday the 13th. And it's a scene from Freddy Krueger Friday the 13th of the lady slumped over in the canoe by herself. And it was this very kind of like austere, like weird green, murky color painting, and it had that black border on the bottom. And so when I was reading one of the articles on the painting, it was a reference to the idea of a nightmare. You know, like the image was this idea of something that you would wake up from as it being like a nightmare. And the movie was Nightmare on Elm Street, obviously. And so when I was thinking about these migrant situations and listening to these podcasts and watching these documentaries and interviews of these people, it's an actual living, real nightmare that they're choosing, but in a sense don't have another way out that's better for them to go through. And so I just thought it was interesting to, in a way, relate it into different realms that are going on. You know, in a sense, I made the piece this green color with the black band to reference Peter Doig's painting. And the idea that that was a fictional nightmare. And then looking at these images and looking at it as a real nightmare, that these are real people going through this situation. And in all three of the pieces, I wanted to make the individuals the same color as the background. So like in this one, the heads, which this one is called, I forget the name.
Scattered Dreams.
It's called Scattered Dreams, but all their heads are if you saw it in person, the shape of their heads, you can see within the life vest, but their heads are the same color as the water. And all of this stuff was purposeful because in my thought about this, it was almost in a sense, in the more documentaries, I just watched another one last night on DW documentary, and it was about the migrant situation. And there was this boat that rescued 125 migrants in between Italy and Libya. And the boat had to basically circle, and after they rescued them, had to circle for a week in the middle because nobody would accept them. Well, one, they didn't want to take them back to Libya because of the harshness of the prisons that they put these migrants in. And then the European Union wouldn't accept them in there. And it's almost like I look at it in a sense, the reason why I made them the same color as the water is because that's how I view their view, in a sense. They're viewed in the sense that like their value is the same as the water. There is no real value of it. And so that's in a sense why these pieces are that way. Like this one, they're that color. The other one, and the only thing you see here is life vests, is because if they are fortunate enough to be rescued, the first thing that they do is give them life vests because they travel without life vests. They take this journey without any type of, secondary caution. It's just hopefully we'll get across. So this was an actual image of a boat that capsized, and they had life vests, and then they have to slowly get them out. But yeah, so that's kind of, in a sense, what I guess I'm like looking at in these images and kind of having this conversation. And then again, like this one is definitely a much harder to swallow. It's very direct. There's not really much you can look at it and be misled of what's going on. So, in a sense, I look at it as using art to provoke conversation, because I do as well think that there is multiple sides of these situations. It's not one-sided, but I do also look at it in a sense of like, a life is a life, and when that's over, it's over. So you know, it's a little bit harder of a situation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, these works definitely touch a nerve for sure. And they're powerful. Um, but maybe we could just end with something that's been a bit of an anodyne for you, I think. These smaller works, these diaristic works, these flower pieces. Maybe say a few words about these, and then we can take a few questions from the folks who are listening.
Yeah, these I kind of called. I started these in March when everything shut down on us. You know, in March, I had finally finished a space that I was in for such a long time as an artist, in the sense of no longer carrying a crazy rent in New York City. Things were in a very upward momentum within my career. The figurative work, which was also a complete jump, was starting to be received. And I was just starting my journey in Mexico studio. And in March, and I had, you know, when I looked at my schedule at that point in time, there was 2 years of back-to-back programming that I had with my galleries. And in March, obviously everything stopped. So, you know, I had to really look at it as an artist, and reason and why, and what do you do this for, and all of that as an artist. And, you know, it was an interesting time, because it was also like, well, what am I working towards? You know, as an artist, in the beginning, you're working just to, like, hopefully something happens, and then you start in your actual career when things happen, and you're usually working towards, you're finally on a schedule. You know, like, for so much of an artist, you're not on a schedule, you're just trying to, like, make something happen. And it was finally like, I was finally seeing myself to be on a schedule. And then boom, everything was done. And so it was like this continual thought of, like, well, why push? Why go this hard? And so I really needed something that was not as, you know, when you start a show, you're working 6, 8 a year, and then you're starting now and you're working on a schedule. And I needed something that was complete opposite, that I could actually see through in a day from start to finish. You know, something so that it wasn't like that burden and that stress hanging over my head of starting, stopping, starting, stopping. And so I had this idea, in the sense of making these kind of like this daily journal. And I think it was just a really important time to document, you know, to document the feelings that we're all dealing with. And the way that I really wanted to approach it was not look at it from any of the negative information that was being bombarded with all of us daily, all day long. And it was really to kind of, again, within this kind of dark moment, to find something that was very beautiful. And even if flowers only last for a minute, it's still in that moment attractive and beautiful. And so the idea of doing kind of like these daily flower journals of, like, this one was, and I bought this one, it was a nursery, in like a little pop-up nursery here in Mexico, but they take soda cans and they cut them in half, fill it with dirt, put a plant in there, you know? And so it was like this, you know, like this idea of these, in a sense, not having to take something as serious as like a big figurative work or a bigger piece, in the sense of, and that's why as well, it was, let me sketch. And then after I sketched the image let me document the image through a photograph, let me sketch the image on these small pieces. And then I'm only gonna apply the plastic on until I don't wanna do it anymore. And whatever's left in the sense of my sketch marks and my pin marks, that's going to be part of it too. And so that was kind of the approach of these pieces, in a sense of how much is enough, how much is not enough, in a sense, you know, of that balance. So it was a continual daily balancing as well of, you know, I'm going to apply just this half of the leaf and not this other half. And that's okay, because it's balanced out with this other part. And as well, the reason why I would sign it and put the date in the front is because I also thought that not only will I remember March 28th, or July 28th, or whatever the piece is dated, everybody in the world that is alive will remember these 6-8 year long months, like these months of this time. No matter who you are, you'll remember that. It's not like a date that is only referenced to me and my small circle. We all will. And so I just, you know, in a sense, and I'm still doing them now, it's like, it's a great practice, you know, it's a great study. And it's also, in this moment of kind of heaviness, it's also this kind of daily feeling of completion. Like you're still completing something, and you're able to kind of move forward the next day with something else.
I think we all need that, right? We all need to detach from the heaviness of whatever it is that we're working in that moment. And I think that these works are a wonderful way to do that. So I hope you keep doing them.
I am. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna stop sharing now, and I want to say there are some questions here. So let me see. Okay. When you were discussing your artistic process a few minutes ago, around the time when an image of the 2018 aluminum work was on the screen, you mentioned that around 2008, the pieces you were working on started to finally look like art. Could you say a bit more about that? What changed for you that became apparent that the object you were handling had become art and entered into the aesthetic realm?
Well, when I say it finally became art, I probably wasn't wording that correctly. What I mean is art that actually finally has an actual composition. Coming from design and furniture making and element making, the composition is within the design of the coffee table or the fountain. Going from a 3-dimensional to a 2-dimensional, you're trying to put that, you know, flow in the sense of how colors read left to right, angle to angle. The materials, because I was using discarded materials that I was rehammering out to make larger sheets, you know, you'd have all these kind of different movements in the piece, and understanding, in a sense, I guess it's more so understanding what the language I was trying to create with the works. You know, sometimes you just have to go through the process of creating without thought to get that first initial idea out of your system, and then be able to look at it and say, okay, now let me readjust. I see now what I'm doing, the different options. I like that, I don't like this. This is the story that I'm trying to create. This is kind of like the feeling, in the sense that I'm trying to create within my work. And I think when you're first going, you're working under this idea of like excitement and, you know, busyness, and you kind of need to get that out of your system before you can actually see who you are, in a sense, of your work.
That's great. Thank you. I've got a question for you. I think we've got a couple more, but I wanted to ask you, you know, the imagery that you're working with is tough, and you can't help but be affected by that. But, you know, because the materials themselves are so central to your process, I'm wondering if your perspective of the world has changed at all? And if so, how? Simply through the use of the actual materials themselves.
Mhm. What do you mean by like my perspective?
So, you work with these single-use plastic bags, and I mean, you and I talked a little bit about this the other day. Like, they are part of this burden that we as a globe have to bear now, because they're not going anywhere. That bag gets tossed into the ocean, it's tossed in the trash can, ends up in the ocean, ends up around the neck of a turtle, for example, or what have you, or in this big gyre that's circulating in the North Pacific. So I'm just wondering if, like, using the material has changed any perspective that you might have on the world, whether it be labor, environmental, economic, what have you, or maybe all those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it's causing me to do more so is so many of the other works that I did, the stamp paintings, the metal paintings, though I was using references to a lot of outside things that were going on, it was still kind of very central to my immediate environment, or to like the places that I was able to kind of travel to, that I went on trips to. I think this body of work and this material has broadened my mind so much that, like, even at this point, I'm on search to find where my real path with this material is going to lead to, because I also see it having so many different directions that it can lead to that all make sense. I can completely dedicate the rest of this body of work to the ocean cleanup situations, and the water situations of plastic. I can tie it to only to people that work in wastelands and garbage lands. I can tie it to, so many different things, because what's beautiful about the material is that it is universal. And it's not just universal, it's literally something that almost, unless you live in the middle of the Amazon and have never seen people, it's something that almost everybody has used, in some type of way. So it's really kind of where my head is at right now. And having got through this show that's up currently, it's really like where my thought is right now is really trying to find like something to like grab onto, like a real something to really kind of like grab onto, because I also see just, how many different angles I can go with it, and how many different stories I can create and learn about. So it's really, it has opened up my eyes to such more of a world view, world topics, situations. And so it's kind of really, I think right now I'm really just in a space of trying to figure out what is the area that I really kind of want to focus on for a while.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, thank you. There's a question from Elizabeth Brown. Regarding your use of color, could you talk about your approach to rendering the skin tones of Black bodies and bodies of color in your paintings?
Yeah. I look at this and it's an interesting question, because we are definitely in a moment of figurative art, and in a very much of a moment of Black figuration in the Black, African diaspora face, and skin tone. And I guess the way that I really look at it is that I haven't been to, though I do know that there's very heavy situations happening in European countries and in certain areas. And I'm half Austrian myself. My mother's Austrian. So almost every place that I've traveled to and I've seen these, it is of the brown skin. Whether it's been Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, India, Latin America, all the places that I've been to and have had conversations, it is of those skin tones. So I'm not doing it in a way because I am trying to make a statement as a Black artist. I don't really sign up for that personally. You know, people have their say stuff about that, but you know, I grew up in a mixed family in, you know, both sides of the world. And I look at it from the things that I've experienced and the things that I've seen. And so when I go somewhere and see somebody that is of, I don't want to say that, but of white skin, I have no issues portraying that, you know? And I think that's really what this work and what COVID is messing me up with personally is I want to base this work off of all my experiences. It is not a body of work that I want to base off of my internet research. I want to base it off of the stories that I collect. So I don't really care who that is. So yeah, and then I do think that there is some self-reflection as well within this work. You know, I've started without formal education in the art world. I moved to New York with just literally a hope, nothing, trying to make it in this world. And it's been, you know, every body of work that I've done, everything that I've done, when I look at the last 20 years of my life, though I've been fortunate I look at it this way, and this is important. I've struggled intensely, but I've struggled going after my desires. So I don't look at it as I've struggled to put food on my plate because it's my only way. I've struggled and have been in tight situations and crazy situations, but blessed because I've been going after a heart's desire of things that I pursue. At the same time, in the sense of a physical struggle, it has been an insurmountable amount of labor and heavy work. So when I do look at these images and these heavy kind of burdens, I know myself that I've placed that across my own back, you know, and it's a burden of being able to take care of like my family, you know, it's a burden of being able to survive, you know, how much energy will I be able to exert at this level if I don't make it? What, you know, like all those things that play through your head as an artist. So I think there is a portion of these images that I do see myself in as well, you know, relating to that, you know, I'm gonna keep pushing until something happens, you know? So yeah. I think it's twofold.
Yeah.
That's you know, that's
really
that's the honest, pure, heart-to-heart honest answer. There's no sugarcoating with that. Like, I think once I travel again, like, you know, wherever I end up, story-wise, image-wise, like that's what I'll portray, because I also think there's back information that gives reason why I'm doing that. And I think within this body of work, that context is important because it's going to hit everybody much more harder when they know, like, this is a personal thing that I experienced, not just a banana, pineapple, gas can. Like, that's right. That's not the intention with this work at all.
Yeah. No, I think of your work as, telling stories of the human condition.
Yeah,
And, I think that's what makes them so poignant. Um, well, Hugo, I think we'll probably conclude on that note. I just want to thank you for, giving us your time today.
for sure.
And it's been really, really illuminating. So thank you.
Thank
And
you.
and also remind people that you have a show coming up at the Aldrich Museum later this year,
Yeah.
right?
I think that's going to be
Uh,
interesting because it's going to have all these different bodies of work under one roof.
that's great. Thank you. Well, we'll look forward to that, and hopefully we'll be able to travel safely by then. And
Hope so.
yeah. Well, listen, take care, be safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for joining us today.